we will take a little bit of an exception today, since that this is Mamash Erev Rosh Hashanah. And the Pashas of the week are also extremely related to Rosh Hashanah. So we will focus on Rosh Hashanah and mention things from the Pasha. And as we said all the time, that the point is to get to know ourselves a little bit. That's what it's all about. Especially on Rosh Hashanah. As we happened to learn yesterday in class, this is a big principle, that Rosh Hashanah, which is called the head of the year, and we will discuss this term, head of the year. I'm sure you already heard about it. And it's referred to as the beginning of the year, the first day of the year, whereas in fact, this was, and it's referred to as the day of creation, the beginning of everything, the beginning of creation. Whereas in fact, the creation actually took place several days before. Right? We know that Rosh Hashanah is actually the day that Adam Rishon was created, which is the sixth day of creation. There are 5 full days before this. And yet, we say that this is the head of the year, and as a result of that, we call this the beginning of the year, the creation, the day of creation. This should cause each one of us a little bit of a pause. Pause means a little moment to reflect. As I mentioned many times, before Adam Rishon was created, there was a fully developed world. Everything was there, everything was going on. The animals, the birds, the fowl, the fish, the vegetation, the sun rose in the morning and set in the evening, and the moon and the stars, everything was in full gear, full activity. And then Adam Rishon came on the scene. And when he came to the scene, Hashem said, this is the beginning of creation. This is the real thing. The simple principle of this, every one of us senses. We sense it with our intellect. We all sense that there is a profound and a categorical difference between the human being and the rest of the creation. Everyone understands that. Even though we live in a kind of confused world where this distinction is kind of losing its clarity. But to us, anyone who thinks with a clear intellect senses right away that the human being, this is a category in itself. This is not an animal with some other qualities. It's not an animal. One aspect, before I want to develop this thing, one aspect that points out to us clearly the difference between the human being and everything else is in the manner that he was created. And the Torah, even though it's extremely brief, but the Torah describes in its brevity how everything was created and how Adam Rishon was created. Everything was created, if you look in the Chumash, it was created by Hashem's word. Hashem commanded, and Hashem commanded the earth to bring forth animals, living animals. And Hashem commanded the waters to bring forth fish, all kinds of different fish. They all kind of sprouted from the earth. And when the animals came forth from the earth, as the Torah describes it, it is called Nefesh Chaya, a living being. It came from the earth alive, with its life force. Call it a soul, with its life force, that which makes it living, life. The human being was created in a different way. His body was first formed from earth. And that's what the Torah describes. Hashem gathered earth and formed the earth into the appearance of a human body. And then Hashem blew into his nostrils a soul of life, and he came to life. This is how the Torah describes it. Now, the Torah does not describe this in order to give us a formula how to create man or how to create animals. That's not what this is all about. This whole phenomenon of creation is exclusively in the godly domain. We have no comprehension how anything was created. What is the point of telling us these details, how the animals came to be, how the human being came to be, is in order for us to get an understanding of what the animal stands for and what the human being stands for. Because there is room for confusion, as we know today. The animals also are alive, and they also need to eat, and they also beget young, they have their offspring, and they take care of their offspring. And they create all kinds of different aspects that allow them to flourish and to develop and to subsist, to continue to be. Some people observe animals, and of animals many times display very cunning, very tricky actions. And people get taken aback and say, hey, look at this. He's so smart. He's got wisdom. And what's the difference between him and the human being? And this is why it is necessary for us to understand this difference from its base, from its inception. And the point of understanding this, the principle, the purpose of understanding it, is not in order to abuse the animal, but it's in order to understand what our function in the world is and what our duty is. And when can we rightfully be called human beings? This description of how a human being was created in contrast to how the animal was created tells us one important principle. The animal also has a living soul, has a living power. But its life is limited, is exclusively for this purpose of bringing his body to life. Because the life and the body came out together. The function and the capability and the extent of this life is to keep the body alive. So that the animal can walk, the animal can eat, the animal can protect itself, all kinds of different things. And what is it protecting? It's all about its presence in a bodily state. And all its capabilities, all its quote-unquote intelligent capabilities are all limited on the level of the body, as we will discuss a little later. The human being is completely unique in that the body and the soul are two entirely separate entities. The body was formed first by itself, and then a soul was put into this body. This soul has as a function to give life to the body. But if it were just to give life to the body, then it would have been created together with the body. The real function, the real purpose of this soul is to bring into the world, into the human being, the awareness and the capability of knowing and understanding things which are not body related at all. Spiritual things which are not body related at all. Soul, exclusively soul elements, neshama elements. There is a certain element of independence, of separateness, of superiority of the soul. There's an element in the soul that has nothing to do with giving life to the body. It's just soul for the sake of soul. That does not exist in any other creature in the world. Every other creature in the world, its soul, its life force, all has to do with how it functions in the body. In principle, this is the definition of intelligence. What is, in fact, the meaning of the word intelligence? I mention this all the time, that intelligence is very grossly misunderstood in today's world, where it is considered that what is intelligence? The idea of figuring out things on the physical arena. Say mathematics, very smart thing. But all mathematics is, you learn how to manipulate numbers. The numbers exist as a physical presence. So this is intelligence, it has to do with the physical world. This is where we get confused, because a human being can find his way around, can find his way from Seagate to 770. You know something? Animals can find their way also.
Right, it's like memorization. What you're speaking of right now, the intelligence that society conceives of often, that physical kind of intelligence. It's like memorization merely, right? Rather than anything else.
Well, I'm not talking about the memorization. I'm talking about the smarts, the figuring things out, which is beyond memorization. But the idea of figuring things out, I'll explain more definitively, and it'll become clear. The Gemara says that if the Torah were not given to Eden, if God forbid we did not get the Torah, we would have learned certain moral, decent behavior principles, decent way of behavior from animals. That's what the Gemara says. A cat, is by nature very clean and discreet. The ants are by nature very correct. They don't steal from each other. They have certain rules amongst themselves. The eagle protects its young, has a special affinity of protecting its young. All animals have various natures. And therefore the Gemara says that if the Torah were not given, we would have had to learn these qualities from the animal. So now this is really a shocking statement, because if the animal knows it on their own without getting a Torah, why does a human being need to be given a Torah? Why doesn't a human being figure it out on his own also? Why does he have to learn it from an animal? It's like an insult. The animal can figure it out on its own. And the human being could not. He would need to learn from the animal. The similar question, which I already mentioned here not long ago, I think, similar question is also another phenomenon. I mentioned, I think, that a baby, a human baby, when a baby is born, an infant, it takes a baby about a year before he begins trying to stand up. To make a step, it takes a year and a half. Just to take one step. Then it falls down, picks up again. Lahavdil, an animal, within a half hour after it drops, it jumps around. A horse, a colt, after it's dropped, half an hour later, it jumps around again. So what does that make you? What makes you think? Is the horse so much more advanced than a human being? A human being, it takes a year and a half to learn, or to begin to learn, that which the horse can do within a half hour after birth. Doesn't make any sense. What is the explanation? Clearly we know that the human being is infinitely superior to the horse. There's no comparison. It's not in the same league. But how do we explain it? The answer is that the horse and every animal, whatever qualities they have, they do it instinctively. They don't have an intellectual recognition. This is right, this is wrong, this is beautiful, this is ugly. This is their nature. This nature that they have is a reflection of the godly midas with which they were created. Because everything that was created originates from a godly quality, reflects some kind of godly quality, and therefore they have these qualities. An eagle, for instance, he was mishtalshel, he developed, he evolved from a midas chesed somayla, and therefore he has the inyan of chesed, and so forth other animals. But they are not aware intellectually of what their nature and what their nature stands for and the qualities that they represent. A human being, on the other hand, was created without any specific nature. Everything that a human being does is all learned through an intellectual process. He has to be intellectually aware of what it is that he's doing. Thus, the little child that takes a year and a half to learn how to walk, why does it take him a year and a half? Because during this year and a half, he's not just learning how to walk on his feet. He processes in his intellect the whole concept of walking. And he says, hey, it makes sense. It's a good thing. I really would like to walk. And then he teaches himself to walk because of this realization of this, the wonder of walking. And it's an interesting thing because you know that a baby doesn't start walking right away. First starts crawling. It crawls and it gets to where it wants. Then slowly begins to start walking. Once it begins to start walking, it gets up for a moment, takes a half a step and falls down. Gets up again, takes a half a step and falls down. If he wants to get someplace, it's much faster for him to go and crawl over there. Poop, 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 1, 2, 3, he's there. But he doesn't want it anymore. It's below his dignity to go and crawl. Now he wants to stand up. Despite the fact that he's going to stand up and fall again, sometimes even get hurt, makes no difference. That's what he has to do. Why? Because his intellect tells him that's the way to walk. That's the human way to do it. Therefore, when an infant, when a baby even tries to make a step, he is already light years away in intelligence from the horse that ran around for a year. Totally not in that league, because he has an intellectual perception of the significance of walking. In general, to put it in a nutshell, the principle of the intellect is that the human being is able, and not only able, but that is his tendency, to conceptualize, to recognize in his mind what is going on. He is not just what we call reactive. This is here, so I follow, I react to it. He understands in his mind that this thing exists. To give you an example you will all recognize. Anything that a human being observes in comparison to the observation of an animal, the animal observes it only from the perspective of what is this thing mean to me. Like he sees an animal, his thought is, who is going to be whose lunch? Is it going to be my lunch or I'm going to be his lunch? In other words, it's all reactive. It's on a personal level. It doesn't have a concept. What kind of animal is it? He doesn't know what it is. A human being, when he perceives something, he sees it from every angle. He sees it as reality. His intellect is independent, is really a godly gift of being able to discern and understand and to know truth in itself, pure truth. Not just practical and personal interest. This is what we call objective intellect. Objective intellect means to know the truth because it's true, not because I have some I have personal experience in it. This capability of knowing things at that level, this is, as I said, uniquely human. It's truly a godly gift. And it's demonstrated, as I mentioned before, in the fact that the human being was created in this manner, that he has a neshama that is independent of the body. It's not just a neshama that makes the body live. It's a neshama that gives him thought and gives him concepts that have nothing to do with body. They just tell him what the truth is. Nothing to do with body. I always have this question. I don't know if I ever presented this question here. I'm presenting it now, just to get a sharp view of what occurred on the year of Rosh Hashanah, what occurred when Adam Rishon was created. And the question is, what would the world be if not for the human being? Imagine a world without a human being. No humans, no Yidden, nothing, no human beings. What do you think that world is? Nothing. What do you think, Baruch?
Well, I think it will be the same answer that I gave you last time. This question. That it'll be just a vicious, as they could mention, a vicious cycle. It's just animals, so there will be no purpose to it. Absolutely no purpose.
No significance.
No significance.
Certainly would be no justification of saying, create such a world. What's the point? Right? What's the point? How did the human being change this? I'm sorry? He changed it because the human being, brings into the world something that is actually super worldly. It's not part of the world. Something that is true independent of the world. You want a translation? No? Okay, don't worry. Don't worry, you can go ahead.
You won't find super worldly. Divine.
Что?
Богское. Бога. Человек несет divinity.
So that the human being brought into the world, the creation of the human being, it brought into the world the sense that there is a real presence. It's not just a natural cycle. There's a godly presence, a real purpose. This purpose, to understand what the human intellect definitively and in a broad way, this is not for this kind of a session. But one thing we do recognize, that the human being, each one of us recognize the human being is a unique and creation. And as such, it puts on us as Yidden very special, it gives us very special privileges, and it also gives us a very special responsibility. Now, this responsibility can be understood from from many levels. It carries responsibility towards other people, responsibility towards the world. The first sense of responsibility is responsibility to your own neshama. Responsibility to yourself. Since that Hashem had given each human being, especially each Yid, a neshama, as we said, that is independent of the guf, that allows him to understand and to know things that are absolutely true. Now, it's not worldly true, but true in the absolute sense. Therefore, it is our responsibility to allow this neshama to develop and to flourish. When a human being, when a person becomes dependent, drawn down by his bodily interests, bodily needs, then he is not functioning in the full sense of a human being. He's not functioning with this, so to speak, with this intellect, with this independent presence that Hashem gave him. For instance, every human being needs to eat. Every creature in the world has to eat, and human being is no different. We all have to eat. We have to eat in order to be healthy and stay alive, in order to be able to do what we need to do. And here is what the difference is. We, just as we said before about the child learning how to walk, we have to have some kind of an intellectual recognition and justification and understanding of what eating is. If a person becomes, so to speak, enslaved, quote unquote, by his food, by his eating, then he's not functioning like a human being. Because he is then he is under the control of his bodily needs, and he doesn't have an intellectual perception of what he's doing. These type of aspects are to be found almost at every step in a person's life. I always speak about the getting up in the morning, which is a whole milchama, it's a whole nisoyin, a whole difficulty. The difficulty is because as we are sleeping, we become, so to speak, involved in the bodily experience of sleeping, and we do not sense that there is something more. And we are at that time not functioning in full human capacity, in full intellectual capacity. This is the reason, as we started learning in the Maimer, this is the reason that Rosh Hashanah, the day of Adam Rishon's, the creation of Adam Rishon, is considered the head of the year. It's considered the beginning of all creation. Because in fact, if not for Rosh Hashanah, the creation is not a creation. It has absolutely no significance. It's a non-entity. This is why on Rosh Hashanah, since that this is the day when this is all rejuvenated and coming again in the full cycle, this is the time when each one of us is required to reflect on where does he stand in terms of fulfilling his duty to himself. Where does he stand in terms of being a full-fledged, close to a full-fledged human being? Rosh Hashanah is referred to as a day when we do tshuva and we come back to Hashem and we ask, and we actually, it's called the day of coronation, of coronating the king, of declaring Hashem king over the world. Now, this whole principle that we want to coronate a king, we want to have a king. If we reflect on it from an earthly and a worldly perspective, who needs a king? A king is going to be my boss. I want to be free to do whatever I want. What is a king about? So for this, the Gemara tells a very simple little story. The Gemara says, a moshel. A moshel means an analogy, an allegory. A melech came to town, and along with him came all his ministers, the entire entourage, all kinds of different ministers. Ministers, a minister of commerce, ministers of agriculture, all kinds of different ministers. And people came out to greet them, and they were looking at this entourage. They see the king, and they see all the ministers. So every one of these people who are greeting the king, each one is involved in his own field. This one is a farmer. This one is a businessman. This one is an engineer. This one is whatever else. So each one is saying, "Oh, look at this. I want to associate and befriend the Minister of Agriculture. He's going to help me out with my farm." Right? Makes sense? Then the other one says, "I want to befriend the Minister of Commerce. He's going to help me out with my international business." Each one has their own interest. The king, he's got nothing. He's not involved in anything. Nobody ever is going to go to the king and say, "Can you give me a loan for my home?" You know, a loan, you have to go to the bank. Or anything else. So the king is standing there. Nobody routes for the king. Said, this is what the Medrash says. It says, "Hoyoshom pikach echad." Amongst all of these people who are making their choices, there was one wise man. One pikach, one wise person. And the wise man says, "I pick the king. I want the king." And when that happens, all the others stand on the side and they laugh at him. What are you going to get from the king? The king sits in his palace, and he's not involved in any practical aspect of running the country. What need the king for? And the wise man answers them, and he says, in simple terms, the king, this is the real thing. This is that will last forever. It doesn't change. This is the real thing. These ministers, they each have their function. They are there when they are needed. But the real thing, that's the king. What makes the country into a country? What gives a country its status as a sovereign land? It's the king. Therefore, says, if I have a king, then everything else will fall into place. If I don't have a king and I have everything else, this is like having, like we said before, having a world without a human being. You have everything, but you don't have a real purpose, a real significance. So this is the principle with which we approach Rosh Hashanah. And each one has to reflect to himself in terms of how well do I represent, how well do I fulfill this crown, this principle that Hashem has bestowed upon me. How well do I add up, do I represent the human being? Do I live according to my intellect? Am I sensitive to real values? Or am I drawn and controlled by my bodily needs? Like the rest of the world, like the rest of the creation. Controlled by bodily needs, the Alter Rebbe explains, could be very excellent activities, like the cat could be tzniusdik, and he could be clean, it could be all kinds of different things. But it is coming from a bodily a reaction, from a natural reaction, rather than from the intellect. And if it's not coming from the intellect, it's not human. You're not really fulfilling the human purpose, human duty.
Sorry, it also implies, I would think, a lack of self-control. You're controlled by something else rather than you're controlling, rather than when you're thinking with your intellect, with your mind, and doing Hashem's will, which is to control yourself with the intellect. You're being controlled by something outside of yourself. It's implying a lack of self-control. And that, I think, like you mentioned before, when we indulge in our bodily wants and desires, God forbid, this becomes an annoyance to us, a nuisance, because it implies we're giving over our control, or rather our own control that Hashem has given us, to a particular, animalistic desire, instinctual rather than...
Right. And on Rosh Hashanah, this is the point which I would like that we should realize. On Rosh Hashanah, the important point about this is not merely that we are being controlled by our bodily, by our instinct, or by our intellect. The point of this is that we, as godly creations, as the miraculous godly creations, because a human being is completely outside of the realm of a worldly realm. Limits, natural limits. Are we fulfilling God's mission, God's command to us? That's the point. I know how you're familiar with. I'm always attacking the theory of evolution because I feel that it has crept into many people's mind, and we have to kind of wash it out. It's an interesting thing. Boggles the mind, really. the theory of evolution has a full-fledged explanation how everything developed, right? From micro, whatever it is, developed until it became an amoeba, became this, until it became a monkey and became a human being. kind of a process. So an interesting thing. Everything follows naturally. Right? The atom became a molecule. The molecule became a complex, a small animal, and so forth. Some developed. Everything makes sense. The only thing that doesn't make sense is the human being. The human being, he flusters. He's. You know how the human being is explained in the evolutionary theory? Mistake of nature. It's not a joke. A mistake of nature. In other words, even that stupid approach, it breaks down at that point. Because it's clear that the human being is not part of nature. And this brings up, just as a conclusion, an important element in our behavior pattern, particularly in our relationship with our friends, relationship with others, and in yeshiva, when you have close proximity to each other, it's very important to understand. When people are very close to, close in terms of living in close quarters and interacting, a tremendous amount of interaction, it's inevitable. That inevitable means, translate inevitable. It has to happen that at one point or another one becomes offended by the other. He feels he wasn't treated right. The offense could be whatever it is, small or big. And it is a natural reaction by us. The Gemara says that when a person is offended, the Alter Rebbe brings it down, a person is offended, and the other person comes and asks him for forgiveness, he must immediately forgive him. What do you say? Immediately forgive him. And wipe it away like it never happened. Natural reaction, and this is what's going on in the world, and this is what the psychologists teach us. And they say, no, wait a second. You have to really think it through. You have to really think how you feel about it. And work it through your own psyche, work it through your own stomach, until you really can come forth. In other words, a human being should act and react on the basis of what his stomach is telling him, how he feels. We are saying,
an animal.
It's like an animal. Instinct. We are saying this is totally wrong. This is not how you're supposed to behave. This is not what a human being is. It is not the stature of a human being. For a human being, he has to reflect. There are several points. The first point is this. If somebody offended, you were offended by a friend. Okay, yes, the friend did something wrong. He offended you. But the relationship between you and this other person is not just the relationship between you and this other person. The relationship between the other person represents the relationship between two Jewish people. Not just between you and me. It's much bigger than between you and me. We are godly creations. So if this offense creates a schism between a break between us, it creates a break between us and it creates a break between two Jewish people. And it creates a break within the Jewish nation. So one has to reflect not just how I feel, but what is the right thing to do. What is the correct thing to do? This is where the intellect comes in. This is where you begin to think and understand what is the reality. What's really happening here? The other person, of course, if he offended you, he should ask forgiveness and all things. But that's correct, but that's a separate thing, and that's his problem. We, from our side, have to seek always to see what is the right thing. How should it be? If you have a cut on your finger, and you find, oh, it's a cut on my finger, what are you going to do? You're going to cover it over and let it heal, or you're going to pull it out. How come you got cut? How come you got hurt? You don't do that. You're going to try and let it heal, and it should go away. We have to understand, as I said, in terms of the interaction and the behavior and the relationship between two Eden, it goes very deep in the reality of the Jewish people. But to us, as individuals, it means simply, do I have my mind, my intellect in gear? Do I know what I'm doing? Or am I just acting instinctively? If I'm acting instinctively, then I'm not acting like the human being for whom God created the world. That's what we're saying. God created for the human being, for his capacity of the intellectual understanding. So that when we get involved in this kind of a reaction, sometimes we can challenge ourselves and ask the question, the way I'm behaving right now, am I contributing to the world the human element? Do I justify God having created the world because I'm a human being? But I'm acting like an animal. How do I contribute anything? It's important to understand, especially in our midst, and since I started talking about us over here, I just want to develop a very important point. Everyone over here are adults who are learning how to live at a level that really, by their age and by their previous experience, they should have been way ahead. I mean, everybody understands you. I'm learning alphabets, learning how to read. I mean, that's an insult for an adult who is an intelligent and knows it all really from on a different platform. There's a certain element of frustration, certain element of challenge. I'm learning to live a new life that I never saw before, and I'm doing it because I recognize the significance and the importance of this truth. But the frustration is there. I'd like to reach up to the point where I live at my level, of my intellectual level. Instead of learning alphabets, I can learn Gemara and Asher Taisvus, whatever else. But something that will be challenging to my intellectual capabilities. Everyone has a little bit of frustration. And in moments of this, like this, when in situations where people, so to speak, have this kind of frustrations, there could be all kinds of different reactions that are not warranted. You become very tense, you become very self-conscious, and every little thing can offend us. So we have to give this leeway, this extra room for each other. You have to give this, give extra understanding, recognition, support. Each one of us should be supportive of the other, helping get over his difficulties, because we all go through difficulties. This would mean that we are acting really like human beings, fulfilling our mission as a human being. I'll tell you, personally, Rabbi Lipsker and myself, we were involved in Hadara Torah going back almost 50 years ago, give and take. And also, it was not developed a big school like that, but anyway, we had some students. And the first time, and these are students all Balichuri, were struggling, the first time that I saw two students fight amongst themselves, I was taken aback. I was shocked. How can it be? You're both trying to break through. You're both trying to accomplish something. This is not a place where you're trying to compete. This is not a sports arena. This is not even a school where you're trying to compete. Who is doing better in the school, getting a better mark? This is trying to get to know how to live. It's so to speak, a life necessity. This is not even accumulation of knowledge. It's getting to practicing how to live. It's the child learning how to walk. It's absolutely no room for any infighting. Every one of us needs the assistance, needs the understanding, and we're all frustrated, and we all can sometimes lose our patience a little bit. Anyway, this is just an aside. I hope nobody's going to take offense with this. On the contrary, hopefully that we'll really recognize what it is that we're doing here. Maybe it should help each one of us, whatever duration of time we have here, whatever an opportunity we have been granted by being here, to get a sense and a feel for our human duties and human qualities that Hashem has blessed us with. We should utilize it and develop it, and then be instrumental in promoting it and teaching it to others, and uplifting the whole world. That's what our duty is as Jews, to teach the whole world how to behave like human beings. We tried our best. It didn't seem to be very successful, but we're still trying. So, should have a good Gesund Yor, a Ksiva Chasimatova. And Neighbor Shazir Hashem will accept our prayers, and he will actually send us the Geula Shlema immediately.
Amen.
No more taking offense. Finished. Now we're giving offense. Huh? Being offended, right? Insulting somebody, getting angry. This this kind of thing. All right.